They handcuff my legs and then my hands behind my back, and then they put those two together so they could kind of carry me out like hogtied. I'm screaming, thinking my parents are dead. So if they sneezed, I could not say God bless you. If they looked in my direction, I had to look away. Who's in charge? Hey, we're in charge. We tell you to go in there and beat this person, you're going to do it, or you're next. I have numerous friends who are dead. Good people. Their inner demons were only made worse by being in a place like that.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Dark, Dark World. I'm your host, Jordan Crittenden, and I'm sweating bullets here. Phoenix, Arizona. I had to turn the ceiling fan off because it was giving me some weird room noise. I don't have my usual setup today. In the Arizona desert, in the middle of June, it gets pretty toasty. But this is the dedication that I bring to you listeners. In truth, though, it's not that bad. I'm not going to be talking for very long because today I bring you an interview that has already been recorded. This is just an intro for you all. Today's episode is going to deal with a place called the Elan School. You may or may not have heard of it. Most people haven't. But those who are familiar with it are generally painfully familiar with it. It was a private behavior modification program, or a, quote, therapeutic boarding school, end quote, for high school kids, or for teens. It was located in the wilderness of Maine, in an area called Poland, Maine. It began in 1970 and was finally closed down in 2011. This was because of allegations of abuse that dated back really to the beginning and occurred throughout the school's existence. Elan School has been called everything from a boarding school to a boot camp to an outright cult. And I think the latter is the way today's guest sees Elan School. You're going to learn a lot about the Elan School from the interview today, so I don't need to give you too much background, but if you do want to get more into it, you can look it up on the internet. There has been some coverage of it. There's a very current documentary called The Last Stop. You can watch a trailer for that on YouTube, and that's about the Elan School. It's a pretty powerful trailer. I have not seen the documentary. Vice did some coverage on Elan School. There are several different articles about it. There's Reddit forums talking about Elan School, and apparently the Reddit forums dealing with the Elan School were instrumental in shutting down Elan once and for all. But one of the places you can learn the most about this situation is from my guest today. His name is Joe. Joe and I connected via Instagram when I was in Waco, Texas, working on our coverage for the anniversary of the Waco disaster. And when I had been hashtagging posts, I had used cult because that's often what the Branch Davidians were referred to. And I think by virtue of that hashtag, Joe discovered me, and then I found Joe's page because Joe's Instagram handle is Joe versus the cult. True story. And that's with underscores in between all of those words if you want to go check that out. What's interesting about Joe's Instagram account is that it's all pretty much a comic. And that's also, as I found out from his website, pretty much what Joe is doing. He's telling his story through what he calls a webcomic. And the art's fantastic. It's a really wild story. If you want to look it up and follow along as you listen to the interview, I think that's kind of a fun way to do it. And the website where you can read what Joe has so far with the comic, I think it's the first 28 or 29 chapters now. Yes, he has 29 chapters posted now. The most recent chapter was posted on June 7th. And you can see that here. It's just Elan, ELAN.school. That's the full website. Don't even need the www. Elan, ELAN.school, SCHOOL. You can follow along with the comic there. I mentioned the Instagram already. And Joe will tell you some more about where you can find him at the end of our interview. Just a little bit of housekeeping to get to before I bring you the interview with Joe. We are getting the closed Facebook group up and running. If you're still interested in being a moderator for that group, send me an email at darkworldpod@gmail.com, and we will give you the info for that. If you haven't written a review for the show yet and you're a big fan, please go over to Apple Podcasts, give us a 5-star review, and roast us in the comments, and we'll read it on the next episode. Sorry, it does have to be on Apple or iTunes. It can't be on another podcasting site. We do appreciate those reviews too, but for this specific task, it's got to be on the Apple reviews. 5-star review, roast us in the comments. And stay tuned after the interview for another promo for Real Life, Real Crime with Woody Overton. I now bring you my interview with Joe of Joe vs. Elan School, a true cult classic. I'm here with Joe for an interview today, and I'm going to let Joe tell us sort of as much or as little about himself as he'd like. So go ahead, Joe, whatever you'd like to say about yourself.
Sure, thank you. Well, I'm Joe, and I am 36, and I experienced this interesting thing in my childhood called the Elan School in Maine. And it took a lot of years for me to really figure out kind of what happened to me there. And, the more I kind of thought about the experience, the more I thought, man, people need to hear about this, because not only is it something that I went through, but it's something that a lot of other people went through as kids. And more importantly, it's something that a lot of people are going through now, even as we speak. There's some poor kids somewhere in a place just like that. And that sucks, so I feel like there's not that much awareness about this kind of thing. And, it just, the older I got and the more I kind of could reflect on the experience, the more I wanted to kind of start speaking out about it. So yeah, that's pretty much where I'm at.
Yeah. Well, great. Well, we're happy to have you on the podcast and tell us about this. So, I guess, why don't we just start with your story, how this started for you? Take us back then.
Sure. Well, full disclosure, I did have problems as a teen. I wasn't some innocent kid who got sent away to this kind of reform school. That wasn't me. I definitely did have real problems, and I definitely did, in a lot of ways, need some kind of reality check, or I needed to be separated from the environment that I was in. However, why these kind of places like Elan work is because people think, like, no one knew what Elan was. So, people are sent there by the courts, people are sent there by sometimes school districts, sometimes people are sent there by their parents. And it's pretty obvious at this point that none of those people who send anyone to this place knew what it actually was. They probably just thought it was maybe a military school that, would kind of, be a little bit hard on you and, kind of whip you into shape or whatever. What it actually was is this derivative of this cult that the furthest I can trace it back is this cult called Synanon, which was one of the really like crazy dangerous cults in the U.S. Like they're most notoriously known for putting rattlesnakes in people's mailboxes. It's devious. It's not even like they would put the snake in the mailbox. They would actually de-rattle the snake first. That place, Synanon, had a lot of offshoots. One of them was something called Daytop. There was a man in this place, Daytop, and his name was Joe Ritchie. And he then went from there and started his own kind of Daytop. And it was called Elan. But it's clear that he just kind of took what he learned in this place called Daytop. And unfortunately, someone who was in Elan has surely left Elan and then created another place. Because these things just kind of, they're like a disease. They just spread and evolve, unfortunately, with the knowledge that they learned from trial and error. Things like, especially like how to control people, how to brainwash people. Because when you think about it, it's really, really hard to kind of contain somebody, especially when there's no bars. I mean, that's the kind of thing that people, I mean, it's really genius, because if you would have gone to Elan and just looked at it, you would have seen what looked like kind of like a broken down trailer park. You wouldn't have seen bars, and you wouldn't have seen a guard tower or barbed wire fences. That's how these places kind of get away with it, because you think, well, look, there's no guys with guns in towers, so these people must want to be there. If they didn't, they'd all be running, and people would find out about it because they would talk about it, and people would write letters, or they would call home and they would say that they were being abused. But
why don't you tell us? I don't want you to give away, your whole story in the comic or anything, but why don't you tell us about how it started for you? I know it starts, at least the comic starts off with you sleeping in your bed, and then suddenly you're thrown into this.
Yeah. I mean, I was basically just laying in bed. It was about 2 a.m. I was just a teenager. I thought I was going to school the next day. I had no clue. And to be fair, this doesn't happen to everyone. I think it happens to a lot of people, but it doesn't happen to necessarily every single resident. But it happens to a lot of us, where kind of a deal's made behind our back, and yet we have no clue that it has been made. And maybe during the process they say, listen, how likely is your kid just going to kind of go with us if we show up? And then they probably get some kind of, feel for your personality. And then I guess if you're the kind of person who, I don't know, A, can run fast, or B, is going to fight back, whereas in my case, they basically just stormed my room in the middle of the night, and that included kicking down my door. So I basically was just laying in bed, and I'm a light sleeper, so something woke me up. I was sure, maybe for all I know, it was a guy coughing in the hallway. But I woke up for some reason, and I kind of was sitting there just kind of thinking, why am I up at 3 a.m.? What happened? But not thinking anything really crazy, just going to go back to sleep. And the door basically just exploded, just exploded into the bedroom. And 2 guys came after it. And, you got to understand, these guys weren't dressed in, shirts that said Teen Escort Company, or, they weren't in uniforms. I mean, these were like goons, they were like in black sweatpants and, hoodies, and they were wearing like skull caps. Yeah, I mean, I thought I'm being murdered right now, or this is a kidnapping or home invasion. Maybe I pissed someone off, and they hired these guys to come get me, Of course, my parents are nowhere to be seen at all, so it's not like they were there next to him going, oh, Joe, you have to go with these guys, nothing. Just breaking down my door, grabbing me, physically going after me, because, it's fight or flight. So I wasn't the kind of person who was just going to go with them. I'm not passive like that. So I fought for my life. I mean,
are they saying anything to you, or they're just...
No, not a word was said. They just ran in the room. I guess they were hoping that the door exploding into the room would kind of stun you. I mean, I remember actually fighting back pretty well, considering that these guys were like 250-pound men, and I'm just a little teenager. But, I guess I had just such an adrenaline rush. They were both holding onto a leg, pulling, and I was actually holding on to the end of the bed and actually able to almost do a pull-up with these 2 men holding on to me. Just adrenaline.
And you're how old at this time? You're 16?
Yeah, I was 16 at the time. And, I mean, they basically just eventually tackled me. One just basically just jumped me, while the other one, I think one of them let go of one of the legs and just kind of like, did like a cannonball onto my back. And then they either used zip ties or handcuffs. I can't really remember. I want to say it was handcuffs, to be honest with you. It was like they handcuffed my legs and then my hands behind my back, and then they put those 2 together so they could kind of carry me out like hogtied. I'm screaming, thinking my parents are dead. Where are they? Are they where these people are taking me? Are we all being kidnapped? I'm taken out into the night. I'm screaming my head off, and the van didn't have a logo on it, didn't say anything, just a black van. And they just threw me in the black van, just chucked me in, And that was my kind of introduction to this whole experience. And like I said, I think that's actually part of it. I think that's a designed part of how they want you to begin to process what's happening.
Yeah, how to get there in just a confused state and scared and not knowing what's going on.
Exactly.
And so they still don't tell you anything. You're driving in this van with them, and they're just not speaking to you, not answering any questions.
Yeah, in the beginning, I'm like, cursing at them and asking what the hell's going on, and they're not saying anything. I mean, looking back on it, these guys, this is probably all that these guys did, I can imagine them getting $1,000 a kid or something, and between the two of them, that's $500 for one night's work. They probably just went all around the country doing this, like headhunters for maybe just for Elan or maybe for other schools. I don't know, but I never saw these two guys again. So it's not like they were part of Elan. To be honest with you, before I got to Elan, these men were actually pretty decent to me, So in comparison to what happened when I actually arrived at Elan,
Yeah.
So my memory of these guys isn't even bad. It's like, hey, these two guys are doing their job, and they didn't treat me badly. They were nice. They bought me cigarettes. Eventually, they did kind of say, hey, just so you know, we're not taking you to kill you. We're not kidnapping you. We've been hired to bring you to this place. It's a school. But what they said made no sense. I remember that, and either they didn't know or they kind of wanted me not to know so that I could just have like a little bit more ignorance is bliss kind of. I remember them taking about horseback riding. Oh, it's in the woods of Maine, and there's a lake. You're going to go swimming all the time. I heard there's horseback riding, and there's going to be girls, and it's just going to be a new start for you. So like I said, either they didn't know either, or they were just kind of saying, this poor kid, let's just keep him in fantasy land for a little while.
Yeah, and I'm sure you're not going to believe that, because if you were going to a place that sounds so great, why did you need to get there by being kidnapped in a violent way? So you get to this place eventually, and what do you find? What do you find there? What's there?
So I remember the van pulled in, and I'm still with these two kind of guys, and by this time it's the end of the trip, so it's very different from the beginning. They're cracking jokes with me and everything else, and they're telling me to smoke my last cigarette because I won't be able to bring them in there. And, then as soon as we pulled into this kind of wherever it was, I mean, this place was in the middle of the woods. So I remember the last road was a dirt road, we were just driving on a dirt road, and, it was like the woods opened up like a clearing, and, I started seeing like structures, and, everything just looked so decrepit and broken down and run down. I mean, I remember being scared, like, this isn't a good place. I mean, kind of like what you mentioned, like, it's kind of obvious if you're smart from the get-go that, hey, this isn't going to be a good place because look how they took me. But it really kind of, destroyed any illusions that I could have possibly had once I saw the place with my eyes, because everything just looked, broken down and dark and gloomy, and no one was outside, and you couldn't see anyone. It was like a movie set of like an old broken down. You know what it reminded me of? It reminded me of like some Jason movie, Camp whatever, except Camp is like broken down. It's like, and there's no one there anymore. There was just this feeling of like fear when I just remember like something isn't right, like some pieces aren't aligning in how this should look,
Right.
And then it gets weirder because the van stops and the door slides open, and it was a kid and an adult. It was like a 14-year-old kid and like a 45-year-old adult. And that alone is weird because they were like peers, like I remember that was like the kid was barking orders, and I remember thinking like, that's so weird because, in most situations that you've been in, you can, I mean, maybe it's subconscious and maybe it's body language and maybe it's everything else, but usually when you see a kid who's 14 and an adult who's in his 40s, you don't get the impression that they're peers. You get the impression that one is the father or one is a counselor and there's definitely a relationship between the two that isn't equal. But when they pulled me out, it was like the kid was barking orders like he was a drill sergeant, and the man was, it was like they were a team, and that was really weird. I never forget that. Like, that was so strange. Like, the kid just had this look in his eyes, you know, like I'd never seen a kid look like that. And that's weird in and of itself, you know. You don't usually see 14-year-olds with that kind of demeanor or attitude where it's like they are, you know, they're in charge. And he was like intimidating and clearly like, you know, it's not like he was like da 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 da, you know, barking orders and the staff member was like, hey, chill out. You know, it was like he was barking orders and the staff members, you know, it was like bad cop, you know.
And people seemed to respect him and listen to what he was saying. It wasn't just like, oh, this is some kid yelling for some reason.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and that was really weird, was like, you could tell just in this whole attitude that he was used to being listened to, and he was in that position of power for so long, you know, years. So it was built into him at that point, you know. It was almost like he was just doing his job. He wasn't showing off. He was really just genuinely doing what he normally did. And these two guys, they bring me in the house eventually. As soon as I entered the house, it was like screaming and yelling, and everything was so loud. I remember that everything was just so loud, like, and everything was dirty, and everyone was running around, you know, like it was kids, but it was boys and girls, which I remember that was surprising to me because I thought maybe it would be all boys, but everyone was kind of running around like they had a purpose, you know. It was like going into a factory or something, you know, like everyone kind of like seemed like they knew what they were doing, and they had things on the checklist to do. No one was just kind of sitting around. Everyone was just kind of up and about. And there was, you know, of course, the first thing that happens when you enter something like this is you think to yourself, I got to get out of this place, you know. So let me check the doors, let me check the windows, let me like test my boundaries and test my limits. But it was very obvious from the very beginning that I was their property now, you know, and I wasn't gonna go anywhere. I wasn't even gonna stand up without someone telling me you're allowed to stand up now. And they did it in a very subtle way. Kind of as I entered, it kind of just was like I was being led, and I was being kind of like not pushed along, but I was just kind of being like quickly brought from one thing to the next. And I didn't really have a time to react. And if I wanted to do something, hey, let me use the bathroom real quick, you know, no, we'll get to that in a minute. First, you got to do this, you know. And it was just kind of like I was running through a maze, you know, and they were just putting me deeper into the maze. And then by the time I was finally able to sit down and take a breath and realize what was going on, I wouldn't even say I tried to stand up and they told me I couldn't. I would say I started to look around the room and they told me I couldn't do that, you know. Look up front, you know what I mean?
Yeah. So maybe on some level you've relaxed a little bit because you realize you're probably not going to die today, but at the same time you just have no answers, so you're just completely confused, I guess, or are you still frightened?
You know, I remember thinking, because there were a couple, like I said, an adult was there. So in the beginning I remember thinking, is this some kind of prison with kids and adults in it? You know, anyone from age 14 up to age 50. And if it is, you know, are they going to try to hurt me because I'm young? You know, is this place going to be full of adults and I'm one of the only kids here?
But there weren't a lot of adults there? You really just saw okay, so it was mostly kids at this point.
Yeah, I mean, that was one of the first realizations. And like you said, that kind of made me relax a little bit, was that realization that, okay, it's all kids. It's just really a handful of adults. But like you said, but that just made it, you know, okay, I could breathe the relief, you know. It's not a bunch of adults who are going to, you know, do whatever to me, who knows, but it's a bunch of kids. But why aren't the kids doing what they want to do? Like, how can you control all these kids, you know? I'm looking around the room. I don't see people with guns. I don't see nightsticks. I don't see bars on the window. But at the same time, the doors and the exits and entry points into different rooms were all clearly being guarded. You know, people were standing at them like at attention. But these were other teenagers, though. These were other teenagers. You're thinking to yourself, like, wait, what? You know, like, so you're thinking, he must be a prisoner too, because
Yeah, why aren't they trying to run away like I want to, you know?
Yeah, why aren't they trying to run away, you know? Why are there prisoners guarding the other prisoners? And of course, to kind of like give you a visual cue, all of them had clipboards in their hand.
Mm-hmm.
And that was super weird, you know? Like a bunch of kids holding clipboards.
And these were just the ones you mean by the doors, not everybody in the room.
Well, that was the thing is it was the people at the doors mostly, but there also were kind of like scattered kids holding clipboards, maybe sitting at a table or maybe just kind of walking by who also would have clipboards. Like it kind of was like, okay, what's the deal with the people with the clipboards? You know, there's probably, I would say 8 or 9 that I could see with my eyes.
It was sort of clear that they were in a position of authority over the people that kids that didn't have clipboards or whatnot.
Yeah, exactly. Because it's not like some kids are holding clipboards and other kids are holding books and other kids had backpacks. It was like no one had anything, and then kids had clipboards, and the other people had nothing. I mean, they didn't have backpacks, they didn't have books, they didn't have pens or pencils, they didn't have paper. People had nothing, and then you had people with clipboards. You know, again, like you're kind of trying to figure out what's going on, and you know, for your own safety, you know, that was the thing is it was such a foreign, weird situation that I wasn't even thinking anymore about the kidnapping. I was thinking about what's going on. How am I guess, to be honest, what I was actually thinking was, how do I get to a phone? That was really my first thought was, okay, if I can't run away, you know, I think it's human nature that you think I can outsmart these people, you know, maybe everyone else can't, but I can, or I've got that will that they don't have. So I was kind of thinking along those lines, you know, as soon as I get to a phone, I'm going to just dial this number and then I'm going to tell that person on the other side of the phone, like, I'm going to tell them the right thing and they're going to come get me. And then these suckers are going to be like, oh man, we didn't count on Mr. Joe coming in and being so clever. But as it turns out, they counted on everything, these people.
Yeah. I'm just curious, what was when you were thinking, oh, I need to get to a phone, who would you call? Was it your parents you were thinking of?
Well, actually, for me in particular, like I had this, like I said, I wasn't necessarily the best. I mean, I definitely did have problems, you know, nothing that would have been worthy of being sent to this place, but maybe worthy of being sent to a place that this kind of place is pretending to be, you know, like, hey, he should go to a kind of boarding school, you know, to get away from his environment for a while, you know, that'd be good for him. That is something that I probably needed in my life. So I was in a position, for example, where I had a lawyer. And so I had actually memorized my lawyer's phone number, for any kind of situation where I may need to call them. I had like various kind of like people adults that weren't my parents that I knew could kind of help me if I found myself in trouble. So I thought to myself, you know, kind of like these suckers think I'm going to call my mom, but I'm going to call my lawyer. And then the lawyer's going to send people out here right away, you know, cause he's got my back. Here, you know, I didn't even know what I would tell him because, you know, I didn't know where I was. I don't even know if I knew which state I was in at that point, to be honest with you.
So at this point in your life, your relationship with your parents isn't great. I mean, that's part of the reason probably why you would call someone else. But I'm wondering, at this point, when you're at this place now and not really knowing what's going on, is there any part of you that's sort of figuring out, my parents must be involved with this, they probably had this happen to me, or someone else, or are you still not thinking about that yet?
Well, in my case, well, to be honest with you, I guess you're right in the fact that the last thing you said, like, you're not really thinking about that. Like, you would think that you would be, right? Like, you'd be trying to piece together, like, who did this? Like, was it because I got arrested for such and such and I had a court date, so I was supposed to go to court, or was it because I got expelled from school and the school district recommended this place, or was it my parents? They just kind of were like, you know, hey, we're going to try to, you know, we've made this deal with this place. But to be honest with you, again, like, these kind of places like Elan, they're so good at what they do. You know, they've been around for so long. I think at that point, Elan had been around for 30 years almost, because they opened in the 70s. And I was there in the late 90s. So they had, I mean, just Elan had 30 years of practice. And of course, Elan came from another place, which came from another place, which probably came from another place. So honestly, I wasn't even thinking about that. I was still kind of sensory overload of what was going on around me. And of course, they also were constantly picking at me. So they constantly were, do this, do that. Okay, go here now. Okay, time for this now. Which again, I think is built into that program. It's kind of like, let's never let him get a moment to sit down and think, kind of keep him on his toes. And there were so many things in Elan that were kind of built in like that, where you never really had a moment where you were just still, only at night. Even then, it was like a very small, we got the bare minimum amount of sleep that you legally have to give someone.
Hmm.
So like, for example, we weren't even allowed to go to the dorms until midnight. So, like, it's not like we were like hanging out in dorms and then hanging out in other places. The dorms were on lockdown, totally empty, and they only opened at midnight. So it's not like we went to sleep at midnight. It was like we went into the dorm at midnight.
Right.
By the time you fell asleep, who knows? It was almost probably usually around 1, and then you were up at 8 a.m., on the dot. Someone was screaming into your face at 8 o'clock in the morning, "House, wake up!" And then it's not even like you just kind of woke up and started stretching and, I'm going to go brush my teeth now. It was like you had so many tasks from the moment that you woke up until midnight again. That's why you had to have something called a big brother in the beginning, because you were in such a kind of foreign environment and you had certain responsibilities that you had to do, that you had to have a person who was actually assigned to you who would kind of tell you on a 10-minute by 10-minute basis, like, you got to do this now. And of course, what this person was tasked with, making sure that you didn't do anything you weren't supposed to do, as far as, even on a micro level, you couldn't look in the wrong direction, you couldn't stand up, you couldn't talk to a good amount of the people that were around you, because they had kind of like a caste system, it was called strength. So they had strength and non-strength. And being a new resident, I was a non-strength. And for example, that meant I wasn't allowed to interact with other non-strengths. So if they sneezed, I could not say, "God bless you." If they looked in my direction, I had to look away. If I needed them to pass me something, or if I needed them to do something for me, let's say I needed them to move out of the way because I had to sweep something. I couldn't just say, "Hey, move out of the way," or I couldn't even make a gesture for them to move out of the way. I actually had to ask a strength to be aware. That's what we had to say. We had to say, "Be aware." So I'd have to say, "Mike, be aware." Of course, asking someone to be aware didn't mean they had to say yes either. So you would get no, no, no. And Mike, be aware, no. Steve, be aware, no. Jim, be aware, of what? I need to talk to Billy. Okay, I'll be aware for a couple seconds. Hey Billy, can you move out of the way? And then the guy would say, "Okay, I'm not being aware anymore." So asking them to be aware was actually kind of like a pain in their butt, because they kind of had things they had to do as well. So the house was kind of this insane system of tasks that everyone had to do depending on their position in the house.
So these strengths, and is it becoming sort of clear to you that the teens that had clipboards, or these people that are in higher positions than you, positions of strength, that they were once like you and were taken to this place and have now moved up, or were they just people that happened to work for this place?
As soon as you kind of, you learned really quick, because being in a position of strength, let me say it like this, just like in the real world, there's always someone higher than you, So actually we have something called high strength as well. So if you were a strength, then you had something called high strength who would kind of be barking orders at you as well. And then of course, even among the high strength, there was like a structure, something called shingle, something called chief, something called coordinator, something called full coordinator. And of course, if you were a full coordinator, you'd be yelling at the coordinators. If you were a coordinator, you'd be yelling at the chief. If you were chief, you'd be yelling at the shingles. And if you were staff, you'd be yelling at the full coordinators.
And in no point does it ever get all the way up to an adult. This is all still teens.
Well, at the end, like, would be the staff member, But the staff member who was an adult, it was so hard to even reach the position of full coordinator or coordinator that to even get to that position, like, for example, that kid, that 14 or 15-year-old kid that I met, he was a coordinator. Yeah. To get even to the position of coordinator would be kind of like getting to the position of CEO. You know, you had to be cutthroat, and you had to play the system very well, and you had to kind of stomp on people's heads to get to the top.
So I imagine, like, with that 14-year-old kid, I mean, obviously, to get into these positions of power, you have to really buy into the system. And it's almost like, did some kids kind of love it? Like maybe they felt worthless a lot of their lives and then said, oh, this is a place where I can be a strength and be someone of power, and just like really buy into the system. And that's why he moved up so quickly.
You know, it was two things. You know, it was very like kind of Lord of the Flies. There were definitely people who were power hungry and who wanted, like you said, hey, I'm kind of like this nobody, but now I can, like, you know, now I can be somebody, and now I can make people do what I want them to do. You know, I'm kind of going to be the king. But at the same time, the only way to leave Elan was to go through this power structure. So it wasn't just people who wanted power. It was people who wanted to go home, you know?
Oh, okay.
And you had different privileges as well. So in other words, everything was connected to your rank. So if you were a higher rank, you ate more food. If you were a higher rank, you got more sleep. If you were a higher rank, you could wear better clothes, and you could have a soda, for example. And there were actually trips that you could go on, but you could only go on them if you were, you know, in a very high rank. Like maybe they'd send you bowling or something. It was super structured, and you still were a prisoner, but you were a prisoner who was getting to go bowling, which was a hell of a lot better than spending those 3 hours in this house. So people wanted to be in those positions as well, not just because they were crazy and power hungry, but simply to have more food or really to have the chance to go home. You know, that was the scariest part, was that unlike jail or prison or somewhere like that, where you're kind of told, okay, you broke into a car, you know, you have 2 years, you know, you assaulted someone, you have 5 years, you've committed murder, you have 20 years. In Elan, just everyone kind of had the same sentence, and the sentence was the Elan program. So whether you swore at your parents once or twice, whether you were a heroin addict, whether you smoked pot once or twice, or whether you were a cocaine dealer, you went in the same way and you left the same way.
So the only way to leave is to complete the program. So I guess, when did you start getting some answers? Like, was this all laid out for you pretty early on, or did you slowly have to piece it together? Did someone ever sit down with you and say, hey, Joe, here's the deal?
Yeah, actually someone did. On your very first day in Elan, you were asked to do something called knocking, which is kind of one of the weird rituals that was part of our day, which was where you would stand behind a door and you would knock on the door, and they would say, who's out there? And then you'd say your name, they'd say, come in. And once you entered the room, there'd be something called a dealing crew of 4 people. And these were kids. So in other words, it was someone's job to run dealing crews all day. And they'd have to find 3 other people to run the dealing crew with. And of course, those 3 people also had jobs to do besides being in a dealing crew. So on your first day, you got a dealing crew called an orientation. So I was told, you know, pretty early on, hey, Joe, come knock. I had no idea what they were talking about. And then my big brother said, knock on the door, say your name. I entered the room. When I went in, they kind of said, have a seat, Joe. I sat in a chair facing 4 other people sitting in chairs. And the first person, who was the highest rank, went, and he said, I believe he said, welcome to Elan. This is a 28 to 40 month program. And if you do everything that we tell you to do, you can leave in that 28 months. And I remember thinking, what? You know?
Yeah. Still a long time, even if you do the 28. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, did he say months? I mean, that's another thing. If you kind of go into this place thinking, you have no clue. You're thinking maybe this is a, 6-week boot camp, or
28-day rehab. Yeah.
Yeah. 28-day rehab, you're a kid. So, the longest you've been away from your parents is like 2 weeks at camp. So, you're thinking, what? I'm going to be here for years? And they just drop it on you like that as well. Because I used to also, I know in my comic that I'm making, I'm still in the beginning of the comic, but you got to understand that I was also at a point where I was a coordinator and I was doing dealing crews and I was giving people orientation. I mean, I gave other people orientations at one point. So I know that when you're trained, and of course kids are training you, you're always being trained by the other kids who are, another coordinator is saying, congratulations, you've been promoted as a coordinator. Let me tell you what you have to do as a coordinator. And that kid is telling you because someone told him, because someone told him, because someone told him. And you're told, listen, the first sentence you tell them is you rip off the Band-Aid. You don't pussyfoot around it. You say, welcome to Elan. This is a 28 to 40 month program. And then they tell you, numerous things. Of course, your head is spinning and you're thinking, what the hell? They also, I remember that what they told me was, they tell you, kind of like you're told to give them an orientation, tell them what's going on, but you're told to hit on a few points. One is how long they're going to be there. The second is the cardinal rules. There's 3 cardinal rules, they call them, and it's no sex, no drugs, and no violence. Except these rules are taken to the absolute extreme. So sex is like even looking in the direction of a girl. Violence is even giving someone a handshake. Drugs is anything that could be altering in any way. I mean, I remember kids used to try to take the nitrous canisters, the nitrous from the shaving cream canisters.
Right.
I'm thinking to myself, you go to high school, the principal goes, no drugs, there's no sex in the thing. Yeah, sure, buddy, right. You can't stop people from doing those things, but in this place, they actually could because you were locked away in the middle of the woods. You had no access to anything or anybody. And they took it to such an extreme, the rules, if you broke a cardinal rule, you were sent back to 0. So if you were in Elan for 28 months and you broke a cardinal rule, you were now effectively had treated as if you'd been in Elan for 0 days and 0 months.
Okay. So, yeah, I was just going to ask, and then you just answered it for me. I was going to say, so what happens if Joe decides to sneak out of his house at 3 a.m. and go meet up with Sally as she sneaks out of her house? What sort of punishment could they give you? But they do such a good job of controlling you simply because you don't want to be there 1 minute longer than you have to be, so you're going to behave? Am I right with that?
The consequences are so drastic that, here's the thing, it's like, if you have sex with a girl, you're going back to 0. But if you pass a girl a note, you're getting sent back to 0. Like, there's no, there's no spectrum. There's no, okay, you passed her a note, you're getting sent back 3 months. Oh, you kissed her, you're getting sent back 6 months. Oh, you had sex, you're at 0. No, it's, if you pass a note, you're at 0. The structure itself has been built to even monitor whether you could even pass a girl a note. Getting a can of shaving cream away from the person who's in charge of the shaving cream is so hard. How could you ever expect to get someone to get marijuana in there?
Right.
You can't even get the shaving cream alone.
Yeah. So how long were you there? How many years?
I actually did fairly well compared to the average. So I was there about 30 months.
Okay. And you graduated from the program?
And I actually did graduate, which is totally crazy.
Yeah. So I was that sort of leads, I don't want you to have to, sort of give away everything that's coming in the comic. So I'm going to skip over a little bit for you, but I do want to ask, well, two things. One, this is just sort of a smaller question, and that is, it seems like all they really cared about was behavioral stuff. Like when I say graduate from the program, did they actually care about your studies too, like that you would normally be doing at school if you weren't at Elan, like history and math?
Well, and that's another thing that's kind of funny is this place was called the Elan School. And I know that happened, that was a very deliberate choice to call it a school, but that makes people kind of envision this. I think what most people, like, let's say, who are listening right now would think, okay, these kids wake up, they go through a little bit of hell, they have these little jobs, Then 9:30, 10 o'clock comes around. Then they go to school. They're sitting in classrooms. They're there. They have lunch. They go back to school until maybe 3 p.m. Then they go back to their weird jobs. Then maybe they go do homework, and then they go to bed. No. That's not what Elan was. School was from 7 o'clock at night until 11:30 at night. So the entire concept of school was an afterthought, We spent 8 o'clock in the morning until 7 o'clock at night in the program, the Elan program, which had nothing to do with school. We didn't have homework.
Right.
We didn't have tests. We didn't have quizzes. We didn't say, hey, I got a science project that's due, so I can't do my job in the program today. All we did was the Elan program. And then at night, year round at night, teachers came in from outside. They were brought in, and we stayed in the same place that we lived. So we were in one house. We worked in that house. We did the program in the house. We slept in that house, and we had school in that house. So we never left the confines of the house, ever. None of the classes were actual classes. So it's not like algebra class and trigonometry class. It was just math class.
Yeah, because you've got kids of all different ages too, right? And they're just...
You had a 13-year-old and a 19-year-old in the same math class. It was really just kind of like going through the motions.
Yeah, just so they could say they had some schooling there. Or
exactly. And the reason that this was brilliant was because they would then, and I'm sure this is some kind of fraud as well, they would then, make it pretty damn easy for you to, get straight A's. So, I eventually got straight A's, because, to get an A in math, I just had to do one page of the book, and then grade it myself from the answers in the back. And I could choose anything I wanted. So no one was micromanaging me or looking over my shoulder, I could have done algebra 1 as a senior and done a page of, page 3 of the algebra book. And then at the end, just, grade my own work in the back. No one's checking that either. Turn it in. Oh, I got 100. Do that for 6-7 months and, you get an A. So what happens is, like I said, it's kind of the genius of it. What happens is your parents are now getting these quote unquote report cards. Hey, he's a straight A student now. They don't know that there's no projects, there's no tests, there's no quizzes, there's no lectures. You're just sitting in rooms for 45 minutes at a time and basically just doing busy work. The teachers are just watching you. And in defense of the teachers, Elan was such a covert situation where like teachers didn't know what was going on. I can remember we used to have for example, the highest ranking student would sit by the door. That was a rule. But the teachers, of course, didn't know that, and they didn't know that that kid standing by the door was guarding the door so that none of us, tried to make a run for it. And if anyone raised their hand and said, oh, hey, Mr. Jimmy, we're being abused here, that person would have been escorted immediately out of the room by the other kids, the high strengths. You would have been grabbed, physically grabbed by a high strength, pulled out of the room. That was a big offense if you tried to do something like that. They called it manipulating. So they would accuse you of trying to manipulate the teacher. And you would probably get, you would definitely get something called a general meeting, which is one of our punishments, where they would have
right.
The entire house screaming at you in your face, basically spitting on you, inches away from you.
Yeah, that's one of the powerful parts of the early parts of your comic. That when you first get the general meeting and the broomstick gets put on the floor, and you're like, what's going to happen with this? And then. Yeah, it's very intense.
It really is. I kind of look at it like being waterboarded because, you gotta look at it like this. When someone's being waterboarded, right, the genius of waterboarding someone is you're not actually drowning them, You're just triggering their brain into thinking that they're drowning. It's like it's a very genius kind of torture method, because They've actually engineered a way to make your brain think you're drowning. So for you, you're drowning. You know what I mean? I don't think people realize that. If you're being waterboarded, you're not going, oh, I'm not really drowning. There's a guy, holding a cloth over my mouth or whatever. Your brain is actually tricked. So your brain is going, I'm drowning, I'm dying, I'm dying, I'm drowning, you're drowning. Kind of like that's what's going on with a general meeting, No one is touching you, No one is beating you. Of course, we had that in Elan. It was called the ring, which we'll talk about later. But no one is actually touching you. But when you have this many people inches away from your face, screaming, veins popping out of their neck, yelling at you the most horrible things, pointing at you and gesturing in the most, angry, aggressive way, your mind is going, oh my God, I'm going to get hit, I'm going to get hit. Oh my God, I'm going to get hit, because that's how your brain is. Your brain doesn't imagine a person running up to you, getting in your face, inches away from you, and not hitting you or not attacking you. And then you got to imagine that times 60. So in your mind, you think that you're getting, gang jumped by a gang of 50 or 60 kids. That's terror. That's pure terror. And you can't even say to yourself, it's not really happening. They're not, even after you've seen 100 GMs, you're not going, they're not going to touch me. They can't go beyond the broomstick, No, you're thinking in your mind, just like with being waterboarded, you're thinking in your mind is now independently panicking without you having anything to do, without logic having anything to do with it. You're going, you're in a state that is something you can't even describe until you go through it. And luckily, 99% of the people on this earth will never have to go through that because it's such a strange, bizarre thing. That's what I mean. Like these kind of things are engineered so well. And again, to call it a general meeting.
Yeah, it's like a euphemism, and it's really just like the tip of the iceberg because, and I'm going to fast forward here, and you had mentioned it earlier, but it looks like, I mean, my research could be off, but it looks like Elan had complaints of abuse even back as far as the 70s, and eventually it does get closed in 2011 because of abuse claims. I mean, so maybe there was more intense stuff going on than general meetings, and I don't know how much you want to talk about that, but...
Yeah, the general meeting, honestly, was terrifying because, like I said, it like triggered some part of your brain that you could no longer even control. You just were, like I said, like being waterboarded. You're not drowning, but you think you are. General meeting, you're not being attacked, but you think you are. You're going through the fear of being attacked by your own peers, your own friends, in some cases, because you had to go. There was no. I'm not going. That's Joe, my buddy. It was like even if you like someone and had to keep it a secret, because that was also a big no-no, having any kind of relationship like that. But even if you secretly did like them, you couldn't not go. You had to go, and you had to make it real. But as crazy as general meetings are, I think that the only deterrent for a human being at the most basic level is violence. And I mean, that sucks. But that's the truth. That's human nature. If there wasn't an element of violence, then it wouldn't have worked. The Elan program wouldn't have been able to contain anybody. So at the end of the day, there had to be this threat of, hey, if you mess with us, we're gonna beat the shit out of you. You know what I mean? And so they had something called the ring, which was exactly that. And of course, when you just hear the words "the ring," it kind of has this kind of mystic, oh, what's that, And I remember thinking, hey, even as a resident, the ring, what the hell is that, And being naive, I pictured big, oversized boxing gloves, and I pictured a bouncy ring and ropes,
Yeah.
But it wasn't that at all, It was very thin gloves, kind of like from like the 30s or 40s, like the old kind of boxing gloves that you're basically getting hit in the face with someone's fist, with just like a little bit of fabric over it. And the actual ring was just a ring of kids. So,
like a fight club, kind of.
Like a fight club, yeah. Except imagine a fight club, but the circle is really tight. You don't even have room. You're just like in this really tight circle of kids who are all crazy because they always choose the crazy ones to be in the circle. And you're not only fighting the person who's fighting you, but you're also fighting the people around in the ring who are trying to trip you up and scratch you and push you and shove you, and they're all screaming their heads off.
So you're in a ring. There's a circle of kids around, and you're put inside it to fight someone like a boxing match. And then the kids on the perimeter are also hitting you and doing stuff.
I mean, they're not like. I mean, if they could, they would be overtly just punching you in the face as well. But they know they can't.
So they're like shoving you back in and making sure you're not getting out of there.
Exactly. They're like shoving you back in, or maybe getting little pinches in, and maybe sticking their foot out at quote unquote accidentally, and he tripped, because the way the ring starts is they kind of really, they really dramatize it actually. I mean, I know in the comic it comes off as really dramatized, but that actually is how they would do it. A staff member would come in pretending to hold a microphone, in this corner we have Mike C. He is fighting for good, everything was fighting for good and fighting for evil. They would literally like make a show out of it, Mike is 17 years old. He comes from Boston, Massachusetts. He's a department head of our service crew. Give it up for Mike, And then they'd say, and right. In this corner is Joe N. He, he thinks he's better than everyone here, and he's been here for 3 months, but he hasn't gone anywhere. He's just a giant loser, and he's from Tallahassee, Florida. What do we say to Joe? Boo! It was like a big production. I mean, I remember being shocked by that part. Like,
and so using these two examples, Mike and Joe, it's Joe who's getting sent to the ring because he's done something bad here, right? And so Mike is just like a good fighter who the school kind of uses, or
yeah. Well, what, the place was devious beyond belief, so it was like. So they chose big kids to begin with, but if you want to know truly how deviant they are, and I didn't have this in the comic yet, I mean, they would put your best friend in there against you. You know what I mean? This was all about psychological humiliation. So it wasn't strictly, hey, we're gonna just get the biggest guy in here. It was also like, hey, that guy who you think is your friend? Well, we've told him he has to go in.
Oh, so he might not necessarily want to be in there either.
Oh yeah, I mean, of course we had nutcases who loved it and who wanted to go in and fight you, and then you had people who genuinely were like, I don't want to do this. This is totally messed up. Who's in charge? Hey, we're in charge. We tell you to go in there and beat this person. You're going to do it, or you're next. The thing about the ring that is kind of the craziest element. See, it's not just one-on-one. It's not just one person. It's not just Joe versus Mike. Round 1, fight. 2 minutes later, okay, rest. Go into your corners. Round 2, fight. It was round 1, fight for 2 minutes. The round ends. Mike leaves. Then comes in Jim, and it wasn't a whole production anymore. This is Jim. He's from blah, blah, blah. He's from, no, it was just, here's Jim. Ding, round 2 starts. So then Jim starts fighting you. And you have had no time to recover. I mean, the round one just ended, So now Jim's fighting you. The ring's fighting you. 2 minutes go by, it ends. Jim's out. Now Phil comes in, So the whole point of the ring was really to, what they would say the ring was developed to show people that if they want to bully the house and they want to bully our system, which of course is ironic because, who's the real bully in this situation? But they would say if they want to bully us and they want to show that they're tougher than we are, we're going to show them that they're always going to lose. And of course, the way that you're going to lose is because out of pure exhaustion, because they're going to put you in there for 12, 13, 15 different rounds, and they're going to keep putting in fresh kids. So you have someone who goes into this ring for 26, 28 minutes, back to back, back to back to back, no rest, no rest for you, but rest for the kids going in for you.
And we're talking like they're really getting hit too. I mean, this is.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing is like, as messed up as it sounds, some of these kids, they're looking forward to this because, unfortunately, some of them not even because they're bad and because they're crazy, but simply because, they're teenage boys.
And I imagine being in a place like that, they're looking for a release too, of whatever they're dealing with.
That's a perfect point. I mean, that is, like I said, it's not, you can't just say, oh, they'll, screw those kids. They're horrible. I mean, they've been told that they have to do it. They've been in this place that they hate, and that they're also being, they're also brainwashed, sleep deprived and food deprived. Unfortunately, they start swinging at you, and then you become something else. You become, and they're so good at the brainwashing that they really do kind of convince you that this person is why you're having this problem. Joe is the reason why you didn't eat yesterday, because we had to deal with Joe, and we had to take that out of your lunchtime. Sorry, but if Joe and these other people didn't screw up so much, then things would go well, and you'd all be able to eat for 10 minutes at a time instead of a few minutes. And of course, you're with these people all the time. So there's genuine hate for people. There's people who genuinely you despise them, that they sleep in the room with you, that they shower in the same showers you shower in, they take food at the same table that you take the food from. So some of these kids, in their effort to rebel against Elan, in a way, actually, that really is making your life harder.
How bad did the beatings get? I mean, was there ever, would they stop them if someone was really hurt, or are we talking, it's bloody, need for medical attention?
I'll tell you what, there were times that I saw with my own eyes where the kid is done. They are bloody, busted up. They can't even stand. That's the thing, is it's kind of like, there's the element of the punches, and then there's the element of the exhaustion, and I find that it was the exhaustion that took a lot of kids out, because even kids who were basically saying, hey, I'm going to fight, I don't care. I'm also going to fight because I hate being here, and I'm going to fight you as if you're Elan. You know what I mean? There were kids who put up damn good fights, but you just can't, after 10, 11 rounds, some of these kids couldn't even stand anymore. I mean, and they're trying, they're trying to get up and keep swinging, but they're so tired. And you got someone brand new who just came in, or someone who's been able to rest for 5 or 6 rounds. And I've had them just say, hold him up, hold that kid up. You not being able to stand was no excuse. So they would actually have kids come in the ring and hold you up, and then say round 12 begins, and you would just be getting pummeled in the face while other kids held you up. And if you actually do some research into Elan, into the early days of Elan, there are very credible allegations of a kid actually being killed in the ring, because I guess he maybe had some medical disorder to begin with, or maybe just he had an aneurysm or something, or.
Right. Yeah. I think I might have seen that on your website. One of the links, I stumbled upon an article through that. But it's, so, I mean, did they have like a hospital on site, or like, how were they curing for these injuries and stuff?
Elan was like the ultimate, like, we do not care at all. Like, they had a nurse's station up there, but the nurse was only there like from 9 to 5. Because I think what a lot of people don't understand, and also what they simultaneously do understand, is that if you're in this kind of horrible, insane, brainwashing, violent Nazi camp, for teenagers, you would beg to go to a hospital. Because if you could get sent to the hospital, you could tell the doctors and the nurses, listen, I'm in this place. You got to get the police.
Yeah.
So there was no access to hospital, because on a basic level, they knew that you were going to spill the beans to the doctors and the nurses. Hey, listen, look at me, I'm beat up in this ring. And here's another thing that's interesting about Elan that I never even mentioned to anyone, not in the comic, and no one really knows this. But Elan was notorious for saying, we're going to take kids off of any meds that they're on. So kids would actually go to Elan on meds, for ADD or ADHD or for bipolar disorder, you name it. There was someone in Elan for, you name the disease or the disorder, there was someone in Elan who had it. And Elan, one of its pitches was, we're so good at what we do, and this is something very 1990s that will never get past today. They were so good at what they did that they would tell, part of their marketing was, we don't believe that these diseases are real. We can fix them. So
Right.
kids would come in there and they would immediately be taken off of their meds. And of course, if you think about it, I also believe that people are over-medicated and people are over-diagnosed. But at the same time, there are kids who truly have disorders. There are real schizophrenics and real bipolar disorders that are out there. And those kids would end up in Elan and they'd be taking off their meds.
And then getting beat up potentially on top of it.
Yeah, exactly. And everything else on top of it. So yeah, I mean, I knew kids who had serious injuries and they'd be given 2 aspirin or something. You know what I mean? I also never told anyone this, but I saw a kid try to commit suicide. He snuck kind of like a pen and he just kind of shoved it into himself into his stomach. Where the belly button is. He really was trying to. That's it. He probably also believed that he would get sent to the hospital. Nope, they just put a Band-Aid over that thing. And thank God that kid didn't die. I mean, I don't know what would happen if he would have hit some organ. I mean, he could have easily punctured something, his pancreas. I don't know the human body. But he could have punctured something serious. It wouldn't have mattered. They just would have pulled the pen out just like they did and slapped the damn butterfly thing on top of it and said, go to the isolation room. He got punished for it, obviously, because can't have someone trying to commit suicide on their watch. That's acting out to them. Never forget that happened. And he got no medical attention.
So when you had graduated from the program, is that sort of accredited? Were your parents and people oh, he got a diploma? Was it sort of supposedly equivalent to what you would normally get from a normal high school?
So I went to Elan during my junior year of high school, but I was in Elan for 30 months. The 12 months of my senior year passed. I still was in Elan for another 18 months after that. And they just were kind of nah, I decided to keep going to school and going through the motions of school. I graduated. So in other words, I graduated high school in Elan, although it didn't matter. I had to keep going even after I graduated to the actual school portion of Elan. But I actually also graduated the quote unquote Elan program, whereas, so I got 2 diplomas in a way. Whereas there are kids who didn't graduate the Elan program, but still got the high school diploma. And there are kids who did graduate the Elan program, but didn't get a high school diploma because they graduated the Elan program before they even graduated high school.
At what point in your 30 months there did you realize who had sent you there? And was it your parents that had you sent there?
Well, here's the thing that's interesting. And this is kind of the, the most infuriating part, I think, not only just for me, but for anyone listening to this. So I was sent to Elan because I had been arrested for something. I'm not going to get into specifics of it, but I mean, it wasn't that bad. But when I got arrested with a friend of mine as well. Okay. Now the court system basically tricked my parents and said, hey, he may go to jail. The maximum sentence for this is 5 years. And he's 16, so he's going to spend 2 of those in juvenile and 3 of them in an adult prison, quote unquote, if he gets the maximum. So my mom, of course, flipped out and asked if there was any alternative at all to this, whereas the judge then pulled out 3 brochures and said, well, these are some agreements that we have with various programs. And here's an important detail. The judge said, if we send your child to one of these programs and they complete the program, so if they graduate the Elan program, then we will kind of shelf any charges that the kid had. Your kid will turn 18 anyway, and if he graduates the Elan program, then we'll just put that in his juvenile record, and it'll be gone. It won't even, as an adult, he'll have a clean record or whatever. But if he does not graduate the Elan program, he will leave whenever Elan lets him leave, and he will come back to the court and he will face his charge as if nothing happened. So in other words, had I not graduated and I would have just kind of rotted away in Elan as an odd strength for 40 months and they just discharged me in the end, kind of like dishonorable discharge, then I would have come home and gone to the court as if those 40 months had never even happened.
Right. basically the state recommended to your parents that you go to this place, which, makes me wonder too, like what kind of a racket it was. Like, do you know how much money Elan was making?
$50,000 a kid a year.
Wow.
But let me tell you the best part, because this is really the punchline. This is the sick, morbidly fascinating, twisted punchline that you can only laugh at because I'm the guy who it happened to, and I'm telling you. Because otherwise, it's just the saddest thing ever in the world. The kid who I got arrested with, his parents didn't buy into that, right? They were like, "Nah, we're gonna see what happens." Same judge, same system. He faced the charges and got 38 hours community service, and I think probation. I got sent to Elan for 30 months. He got 30 hours of picking up trash on the side of the road. Because, like I said, the charge, I'm only not saying it because it's identifiable to me. The charge was nothing, It would never have in a million years have resulted in this maximum penalty. The judges, I read a few years later about something in Pennsylvania called Kids for Cash scandal, where Pennsylvania judges were receiving kickbacks for sending kids to these detention centers.
Right.
Now, if you think about Elan, $50,000 a year, how easy would it have been to them to tell a judge, listen, you get $10,000 if you send a kid here. Sure. All you need to do is have the parents sign on the dotted line.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised by that. Yeah.
Exactly. $10,000. I mean, Elan's still making a lot of money. The judges has a big incentive to pull out this brochure. And the scary thing is, my mom said that she chose the brochure that was the shortest, and that was the Elan brochure, which was, 28 to 40 months. That was the only basis that she decided on. Was okay, I'll send them here because this seems like it'll be the quickest.
And I'm sure that brochure did not tell her everything that you'd be getting into. The brochure was probably like what the guys in the van told you. There's horseback riding and
there's a lake and horseback riding and all the kids get straight A's and go to whatever college they want afterwards. So, I mean, and guess what? I didn't find any of that out until I left. Because we couldn't write letters without them being censored. We couldn't make phone calls without someone listening to us and hovering their hand over the receiver, or over the kill switch. Again, as sad as it sounds, that used to be my job. I used to listen to other kids' phone calls and hover my hand over the kill switch because I knew that if they told their parents something they weren't supposed to tell them, and I was the one in charge of listening to that call, I would get in trouble for allowing them to find out. So Elan was really twisted like that. You started off as a prisoner getting, hazed and, learning about this horrible reality. And then you eventually evolved into the person who was doing it to the other people. And so you had to basically at some point say to yourself, listen, my life is more important than this person's life. And these are tense things to be learning as a kid.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's wild. I mean, that Elan closes, and quotations around closes, in 2011 over allegations of abuse that have sort of been throughout. It's, since the 70s. But when you and I were doing our email exchange, setting this up, and, even today you've talked about wanting to keep your identity somewhat concealed. Is that because you still... or you had mentioned to me that this stuff's still going on, and that's part of the reason why you want to tell your story. Is it just going on in different types of settings that are the same thing, or are the Elan people sort of starting up again? What makes you afraid of your identity being out there, that kind of thing?
That's a very interesting question because I mean, just logically, I didn't hear anything in particular, but just logically, I thought, okay, what they did in Elan was they turned us into the perfect people who would keep spreading this. Someone, undoubtedly left Elan from my peer group and has the idea of making a new Elan because they have all the tools they need. We were taught how to build this environment, and someone has definitely done it.
Yeah, I think that's why you call it a cult too, right? Because the brainwashing works so well that even if your whole time there you wanted to be gone, it trickled in so well that now there are probably some people who want to keep living that way and spread it on, right?
Exactly. And then you also have to factor in the idea that, though I didn't really mention, but the staff members at Elan were all ex-Elan. Well, let's say 75% of them were. So 3 out of 4 were ex-Elan. And they were all millionaires. So, and they bragged about being millionaires, you know. So then again, the cold aspect of, hey, I was a kind of a fuck up like you were in Elan, and now I'm a millionaire because not only did I complete Elan, but I've stayed and I've now become a staff member at Elan where I'm getting salaries in the quarter millions and free houses and vacations and cars. Because how can you really hire outside? You know, you can find a couple sick people who are willing to do that out, you know, people who have no experience with Elan, but really what you want is you want an Elan person who's experienced Elan from the inside to then become a staff member to keep the program running. But like I said, kind of interesting that you asked me this question because very recently I was doing some research because of course I'm in all these circles of ex-Elan people and stuff like that. And someone mentioned something very interesting, said, hey, take a look at this. And it was a link to the wife of the owner of Elan and how they had started converting their house into another Elan. But they were calling it something else like, you know, the friendship, you know, I forget what it was called, but it was some kind of bizarre, it was clearly like psychobabble, Elan stuff, like learn how to, you know, through peer confrontation, learn how to become a better member of your community and to find your inner self, and, you know, through breaking you down, we'll build you back up into a, you know, kind of superior, mentality that will help you overcome drug addiction and overcome blah, blah, blah. You know, it was like 100% just Elan from the same people who were the original creators of Elan, or at least had relationships with them, who said, hey, Elan closed, but we have this whole system in place and it's brilliant. I mean, and I can say that because I went through it. I mean, it is morbidly fascinating and brilliant. I mean, it's right. Ingenious, the system they created, because it fed on itself, and it was a wheel that kept itself moving without much need from outsiders. You know, it just, I mean, it's a cult, you know, the cult members made new cult members and brought them in and worked them up to the higher ranks, and then they brought in new people, and then those new people worked in, and then they turned into people brought in the next, and everything kind of fed on itself, and we did all the cleaning, all the cooking, all the security, all the inventory. You know, everything was kind of its self-sustaining system. So, you know, I'm scared because I know that there's people out there who say, hey man, this is a $1 billion industry that we got going on here. You know, $50,000 a kid a year with no government oversight. I mean, that is a money, that's printing money at that point. So these people, they do not want, I mean, I know for a fact that when Elan was being closed down by the online campaign, you know, there was a lot of death threats. There was a lot of very shady things going on, from people who wanted this place to continue. I mean, if you talk to any ex-Elan resident, they will tell you a list of people who are dead, you know, who died after Elan, you know, tragic deaths, you know, people dead before their time, you know. I have numerous friends who are dead, you know, good people who didn't get the help they needed, or their inner demons were only made worse by being in a place like that. Or they were perfectly fine when they got there. They were just normal teenagers, and then they just, you know, got, you know, messed up by that place and became drug addicts and became criminals and became, you know, evolved problems they didn't have before, PTSD and things like that. And now they're dead, you know, from drug overdoses, or just tragic, all the tragic ways that you can imagine that someone could be dead with before they're 30. You know, I got a list of friends. And hopefully one day when I publish this comic, that's going to be who the comic's dedicated to. And I'm not going to put their name, but I may put their initials. because I know some people,
Right.
they don't want their name necessarily, or their son's name or doesn't attach to this thing, but I'll put the initials. And let me tell you, I have a lot of initials to put down, that I knew personally, not even like, hey, let's collect all the people who died in all the different years and all the different houses. I mean, I can just say in my house, in my years, and like I said, that's why I do what I do. Not necessarily just for myself, but for those people on that end of the spectrum, and also for the people on the end of the spectrum who didn't deserve to go there at all. I mean, no one deserved Elan, of course, but some people deserved what Elan pretended to be, to have a wake-up call. I think I'm one of those people. I'm not going to lie. I did deserve a wake-up call, but I met people in Elan who were totally innocent kids. Kids who swore at the parents once or twice, kids who smoked pot once, kids who were just normal teenagers. Some of them even better than normal teenagers. And they still ended up in this place, and they were still treated like scum of the earth and had to see things that we all saw. And, that's why I really do what I'm doing, for those people.
I'm just really glad that you're not one of those statistics and that you're still going and doing this. And I want to encourage all of the listeners to check out the comic. I'm going to put the link for that and stuff. But do you want to let the listeners know where we can find you on social media and what the website is for the comic, the best place to find that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's a really simple web address. It's Elan, so ELAN .school. SCHOOL. So just HTTP, at whatever / you don't even have to put in www. Just Elan School. Elan period school. So Elan.school. You go there and you'll see everything that that I've come up with so far, as like my illustrated memoirs of what I remember, because you really can't just do it with words,
Yeah, it's really cool too. You're a good artist. It's great. It's a really entertaining read. So it's
people can step by step kind of slowly enter this world and without getting too overwhelmed.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, there are links on the website for how you can support it, and Joe's social medias are on there. It's a lot of cool stuff to look at. So I highly recommend you all go and take a look. So, thanks so much for doing this, Joe. Really appreciate it. It's a powerful story.
Yeah. Thanks for giving me, an outlet to tell my story, to all these listeners, because like I said to you kind of in the beginning before we even started recording, unfortunately, a lot of people that in my life, I can't really talk to them about this because, like I said earlier, it's like, hey, how was the game last night? You see it? Oh yeah, so-and-so had a home run. Oh yeah, by the way, I was in this cult for teenagers and we used to beat each other up. You know what I mean? It's not really the kind of thing you can bring up in your daily life with your friends, or, it's just too heavy. So it's really nice to have people interested in it and who want to know more about it, because that's the most important thing, is to bring exposure to these kind of places, because that's how they get away with it. It's not enough exposure to them. But yeah, thanks a lot too for doing this, and let's do it again, man. Let's talk again.
Yeah, absolutely. We can do another part or whatever. Maybe some listeners will have questions we can ask you too. And
yeah, that's cool.
Right on, man. Well, thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you, and take it easy.
Want no sugar in my coffee. It make me mean, Lord. It make me mean.
I'm Woody Overton, the host of Real Life, Real Crime, the podcast. Join me each week to hear true, unscripted stories of the cases I actually worked during my career as a major crime investigator in South Louisiana. Go to realliferealcrime.com to listen to each episode and find links to all of our social media. I appreciate y'all, and don't let me catch you down on Murder Bayou.
And I want no sugar in